In this week's video, we're going to take a listen and walk through 3 LFO Tool inspired presets that I've created. If you want them, just look in the description section. There'll be a link where you can download them. So as I mentioned previously, when we kind of did like our OT style effect, this isn't designed to replace the LFO tool, but it's the jumping off point. It's the inspiration for this particular effect, which is essentially just a beat synced ducking effect, whether that's to volume, whether that involves using a filter or a band on an EQ, which is the way that I've set these ones up. But of course, take them further. You could have this working with any effect, any parameter, and the groundwork has already been laid out for you with this. So that's kind of the point of using it. There have been many times when I've been using this style effect and I just use the Bitwig devices and I always set it up manually. And I figured, you know what, let's just make a preset because this is going to go a lot faster. So we have 3 different modes. We have the classic, which is using an LFO. We have the audio sidechain, which is using an audio sidechain source. And then we have the note sidechain, which is using a note sidechain source. That one's a little bit special. That one's kind of the most fun. And of course, we'll get to that at the end. But let's begin with the LFO Tool Classic. And for the example, we're just going to be putting it over this entire little loop of music. Okay, so you can hear there's some movement and stuff already going on. When you use this effect traditionally, you're not going to be putting it onto a bus, but I'm doing it here just so we can hear it. All right, so here's our LFO Tool Classic. We bring it on, and by default, we shouldn't be hearing anything. Okay, nothing's happening. Now, if I want to turn it on to the volume, all I have to do is press the volume button. And then we set our time here. And it's going to sync up with our tempo no matter what our tempo is. So that's a nice little feature there. I don't know what our tempo was before, but we'll put it on to 100. Then we have a couple of controls. Depth, it's going to do what you expect. Not as extreme a degree of modulation to the volume. And then we have node and curve, and to understand those, we just have to bring up our modulators and we can see the shape right now. So node is gonna bring that point back towards the center. And then curve gives us some flexibility on the actual curve itself. So if we really wanna smooth it out, we can do something a little more like this. And this is a little bit closer to how the LFO tool comes in by default. Okay, but it doesn't stop there. Along with volume, I also have built in a low pass filter and a dynamic EQ. Okay, so I chose to use a low pass filter because when I do the effect, that's normally the way I do it. I know for a lot of people, when you're trying to make room for your like kick and bass, you're using a high pass filter. No worries, you can build that on at any time. But just for me, I usually use a low pass filter just for the movement effect of it. So let's turn it on. And right now it's set pretty extreme, but we can bring that way back. And then we can choose how many poles we want on that filter, if we want to be a steeper slope. Or a less steep slope. So you have a lot of control right there, pretty easy, pretty straightforward to understand. And then the last one we have is the dynamic EQ. So this one's just modulating a band on an EQ2 device. And we'll open it up in a second. I'm just showing you the way that I would personally work with it, which is not to have to go in and look at the effects. Okay, I like to just work from here, get the effect I want and move on. So let's turn it on. Now we can set the frequency. And this one's always going to sound the most transparent. focus in on a very specific frequency, or make it big and wide. Make it really weird and sharp. Let's make it go faster. And now I also have a mode to turn it from a bell into a shelf. Back to the bell. And there you go. So that's the effect, and it's using this LFO to do basically everything. Again, like this is not, again, it's not maybe as flexible as the actual LFO tool because we can't really draw in any sort of shape that we want. But for me, this gives me a wide enough range of effects that I'm happy with it. And now if we actually go in and look at what's going on in here, let's go back to our tool mode, our volume mode. I turn that on. We can see that that turns on the tool and it's going to the amplitude. So it's nothing fancier than that. When we turn on the low pass filter, okay, that is what it's doing. Let's slow it down just so we can actually see. Okay. And when depth, and so the way I set this up, and this is why it's important to kind of use these different controls, if depth is full, it's gonna go almost that entire range. So with the filter one especially, I'd bring back depth a little bit and then kind of set to taste. Okay, and again, we can add on. The way I did this, I think, is a little bit more complicated. Yeah, so this is actually controlling what's going on here, the different low pass modes. So from 4-pole to 1-pole. Currently it is on 1-pole, so it's on the 6 dB per octave. As I go up and we see it change, we're now, each time that change is going. And you're gonna have to use your ears because again, unfortunately, there's no way to take these and snap them to just go to 4 specific spots, which is what I really, that's the one feature I'd really love to see in Bitwig. And I'm not the sort of person that complains about features, and honestly, it's not that big of a deal, but just for the user experience, it would be a little bit better to be able to snap through and not have to just kind of glide to move to the other places. And I'm sure there's probably a way to do it. I'm just stupid. We also have control over resonance. If we want to bring resonance in, we can do that like so. All right, and then on to the last one, which is the EQ. So we'll go and turn on our dynamic EQ and we can bring that in. And again, you can see what's happening. Now, this is where it's gonna be up to you if you wanna customize this a little bit. When I hit shelf, it is not actually going to change the display, but it is changing the curve. You just don't see that. But you can definitely hear it. So some people might want to go in and edit this, and the way you would edit it would be to go in here and just get rid of this from this position. So just delete that out, and then instead just go and click on the mode there, because if you're actually looking at the EQ and you like to look, have that visual representation, now what we can do is actually see the difference. The reason I didn't set it up like this is because if you choose either of the high pass filters, it's not actually going to have an impact. It's not actually going to do anything. I would need it to be actually adjusting the Q down here to make it more of an interesting sound, which you could do. Again, nothing is off limits, but that's the reason why I set it up the way that I set it up. So that is your classic LFO tool example. It's just listening to the signal that's coming in, and it's using an LFO, a beat synced LFO, to make its moves, as you can hear there. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the audio sidechain. So let's bring in some kind of a kick loop. That would be great. Let's see if we got something. Kick loop. Let's see. Oh, this should be perfect. Lovely. All right, we'll go and we will drag that in. That is going to be very loud. So let's also increase the tempo a little bit so it's not going too crazy with the stretching. Okay. And that's going to be our source. And it can be something much more complicated and interesting, but this is, again, the classic way that people are usually using it is like this. So let's go back and bring up our LFO tool presets, and we'll use the audio sidechain. So I drag that on like so. And with this one, the first thing that I have to do every time is click here and set our audio sidechain source. So for right now, it's just gonna listen to what's coming in. But what I'd like to do is set it to that BP 90s underground, and just to be good about naming conventions, we'll call it kick, because that's probably the way you'd have it set up. And I'm gonna choose kick pre, so that we're getting some source. And now it's up to you to go in here and adjust what range you want in terms of those filters. But let's just do the effect. It's basically the same thing, only now we're looking at this curve up here. So, and we can unmute it just for fun. And I've set this one up a little bit differently. I have juice and depth. And the reason for that is depending on the signal that's coming in, if it is a very weak signal, you're gonna wanna juice it. And that's gonna make it louder and probably respond a little bit better. With a kick drum sound like this, it's probably gonna be good enough. But I wouldn't mind bringing up the tool just so you can actually see what I mean. So you can see right now, even with depth all the way, it's not going all the way out. So if I juice it, we'll see that that will actually have that effect. So I usually kind of set these sort of in the middle. So now I'm happy with it. And then the only other controls that we really have to worry about in this case are the rise and the fall. For me, I'm just gonna try to smooth it. And there you go. And now we can go to the low pass. It's doing the exact same thing. This one's a little clicky. So this may not be the best example. It's really struggling with, I think, that high end on the detector. Just try to isolate. There we go. Now we've smoothed it out a little bit more. Oh, I think it's actually, we're just hearing that click come through so cleanly on the kick drum. I thought there was a problem. It's just that click is driving right through. Okay, and then we have our dynamic EQ again. Let's turn that on. I love the way this one sounds. It's just so subtle, so smooth. We can again look and see what we're doing. Let's make sure it's getting out of the way. There you go. Now, as I've been saying, you could go in here and of course you can add on different effects and things if you want to make this a little bit more exciting and fun for yourself, or if you want to have a high pass option as well as a low pass option. This is pretty much routed and set up exactly the same way as the first one, so I don't think we need to go through that. All right, so the last one we can look at is the LFO Tool Note Sidechain. And this one's a lot of fun to work with. The first thing to be aware of is if you do want to use this and have it triggered by the notes on the track itself, this might be the one thing that might confuse you. You would probably never do this with like a kick drum, but if you had something like a pad sound, you might actually want to work with it this way. When I bring this on, notice that we can see that we're getting yellow lights coming in, but when I open up the chain, we're not seeing any movement occurring. So if I turn this on, all it's done is just turn the volume down. So if I want to actually get this to move, I have to click this input button. And now we see it like so. Because the sound is so fast, you're not really hearing anything. You can barely hear it. So I'd have to go in and do some other adjustments. This is what I mean. It's probably not the one that I'd actually work with it on, but I'll go in and show you what I mean. So now you can actually hear something and do some kind of fun volume envelope on it or whatever. Okay, but I just wanted to show you that that's the way that you get it to work on a track of itself. But normally we're going to be using it in more of a sidechain configuration, and that's what we'll do this time. So let's go ahead and bring it back on, and let's listen and see what happens with it. So we have to go into the chain and choose our source. We will use our pro kick, and now we can see we're getting signal in and we're seeing a ball moving on our 4-stage envelope. So we are all good to go. And you can adjust the curves from inside, but you can adjust the positioning of the stages from your control menu here. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And this is probably my favorite one because there's so much you can do just with these 4 stages. And of course you can take it further by going in and manually adjusting some of these things. Lots and lots of potential. And let's turn that off and let's try the next one. That one's a lot of fun, obviously. I really like that one. And then we also have our dynamic EQ mode as well. So we'll turn that on. You can turn multiples of these on at the same time, but for the sake of example. Let's use the low end. We can go in and look at the EQ just to see what's happening with it. And yeah, that's basically the effect. We have the LFO tool style stuff, and this one's the most unique because you can really draw in all sorts of interesting things, and you can ignore the presettings that I have here, or potentially you could even consider adding a new page just for control over these things. And I didn't do this in advance, so this may not work great, but let's go stage 3, stage 4, and then we're gonna see if this works. I'm not entirely sure if this will work. It should. Curve 2, curve 3, curve 4. And then you could work with all this stuff from in here. So anyway, those are the LFO tools. One other thing to be aware of is if you want to even make it, because I think one of the cool things about the LFO tool is that you can have like 8 presets loaded up at once with different shapes. You could do something similar to that here by using like the effects selector. And you could go in and you could just drag multiple instances of, let's just say we're using the classic. I could have multiple instances of this brought up, and with each of those instances, I might just change the time. I might change the location in the way that like that LFO looks. Okay, so that's something that you can definitely do if you want to. Totally up to you. Sorry, that one's not turned on, so that's why you're not seeing it moving. And then you can sort through and listen to the different ones in real time. Okay, so anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you guys this week. Hopefully it's useful for you and something you can take advantage of. And at the very least, if this is an effect that you use a lot and you set up manually time and time again, you've got a preset now. So as long as you know the name of it, you can call it up quickly and get that effect with very little hassle, struggle, or effort. Thanks for watching. Take care.